garage. I'm Aaron. It's been at least a week since I made the last video. If y'all don't know, I live in Texas, and I'm sure you've heard we're having other than normal weather here. Been about a week since I had power or water or anything like that, so we finally got our power back. Still no water, but at least we got power, so I can come back out to the shop and work. It's like 23 degrees today. As you can see, I don't have a whole lot of insulation in my shop. I do have this little diesel torpedo heater here that does a pretty good job keeping it tolerable in here. But I can't really film when it's running because it's super loud. So I'm gonna do the best I can, try to film in between the heater running and whatnot. But first thing I wanna do is just go over what I've done since the last video on the crew cab. So I'll just give you a walk around real quick and then we'll get started on doing the front suspension today. So I got everything finished up for the frame and the suspension. Cleaned it all up really good, cleaned the rear end up really good, threw a coat of paint on it. Shock mounts are all finished. Got them mounted. We took our drive shaft over to the best in the business. We went to Tony over at Fleet Pride in Dallas, and he took real good care of us. Got the drive shaft done, got it back in. I shortened the exhaust, and it was clamped on. You may have seen in the time lapse in the first video, I went to cut it to get it out of the way, and the whole exhaust system just fell out. So you probably can't see very good, but I shortened it and got rid of all the clamps and welded everything together so that it's good to go. And then I got some hangers, spaced it out a little bit because it was real tight to the drive shaft. I didn't like how close it was. So I spaced it out a little bit and rehung it properly. So wheels are on, it's sitting on the ground on its own. So that's about it. Like I said, we're gonna get going on doing the front suspension today. So everything up here is untouched so far. So I'm gonna get it jacked up, get the wheels off, and then I'll bring you guys in there and show you what's going on. All right, hopefully y'all can see some of what I'm doing here. First thing I'm gonna do is take all the extra stuff off. Not extra, but the stuff that's not connected to the control arms. We're gonna pull off the shocks. We'll cut loose the outer tie rod. We'll take the sway bar off. I'm gonna put new brake hoses on it, so we're gonna go ahead and just cut that brake hose. And then once we get to that point, we'll start pulling the control arms off. So I'm just going to buzz these shocks off real quick, and then we'll move on. Alright, we got those out of the way. I'm just going to go ahead and take the sway bar loose from the control arms because we're going to reuse it with the other suspension. So I'll leave it hanging from the frame mounts and we'll just take it loose from the control arms. I'll get some dikes, cut this brake line. So I'm going to run and grab some tools to take that stuff out, and then we'll keep going. Alright, a little bit more work than I planned for, but we got the sway bar out of the way, got the brake line cut, got the tie rod unhooked, shocks off. Next thing we're going to do is try to crack the lower ball joint loose. We're not going to take it all the way, but just get the cotter pin out and get the nut broke loose for now. Okay, so I got that nut on the lower ball joint backed off. Not all the way, just so the castle on the nut, the bottom of the castle on the nut where it starts to thread is even with the top of the ball joint stud. So it's still connected, the upper control arm's still completely connected. I'm going to go ahead and take this pickle fork and I'm going to go in here and pop that ball joint loose. There we go. Just beat on the spindle a little bit around the ball joint and it popped. So, next thing I'm going to do is dangerous. Stupid, you might say. I don't have any spring compressors here. And nothing's open to go rent some. So, I'm just going to stick a jack underneath this to kind of hold the spring the best it can. I've done it this way before, lots of times. So just kind of take a little bit of pressure off of there. And then I'll take this nut the rest of the way off this ball joint. Maybe. Now the whole ball joint wants to spin, of course, because it doesn't have any pressure on it. Might be able to get on it with a swivel socket with the impact. Try that. If you're ever doing this way, don't ever do this way. But if you do, make sure you stay clear of the spring when you're cutting everything loose, because it's still under a lot of load. And that sucker will come out with some authority and do some damage you don't want to be part of. There we go. And like I said, I'm going to turn that towards me because that's putting that in between me and that spring. And I'm going to get back. Usually you can let them down pretty easy and it'll take that tension off of that spring. If you have to do it this way and you're not planning on reusing that spring, get in there with a torch if you got one and cut the spring. And that'll take all the tension off of it. Now we got it all the way down, but our jack's stuck underneath it. So there's ways around all that. We'll get it off here in a second. That spring's still got quite a bit of tension on it, so I really don't need the spring, but as much stuff as I do on these trucks, I don't want to cut it, so we're going to try to save it. So, see if I can take some tension off of it with a pry bar and get the jack out from under it. Like that. Now that spring's loose. No damage done. So, got that done. Next thing we're going to do is just take these bolts off. Right here where the upper control arm mounts to the frame. There's nuts here, we're going to take these off. And then we should be able to pull that whole upper control arm with the spindle rotor and everything off, get it out of the way. So that's what I'm going to do next. I got a whole bunch of dirt and stuff in here. I'm going to go get something, try to pick it out so I can at least see the nut before I get started. Okay, so I sat here and played around with my nuts for a little bit and finally got them off. So now we should just be able to lift up on this upper control arm spindle assembly and pull it off. It's been on there since '83. You can tell it's never been messed with, so I'm sure it's not just going to fall right off of there, but okay, maybe it will. So we're going to leave everything else the way it is. We're going to leave all our shims and stuff in there, put our new suspension on it. It's not going to make the alignment right, but it'll be close enough to drive it to the alignment shop. So I'm going to go ahead and get this stuff out of the way, clean a bunch of this dirt and mouse crap and whatever else out of here, and then we'll work on taking the lower control arm off. Okay, so I'm just working on cleaning this up. I'm not really planning on filming it. It's going to take a while to get all this mud and dirt out of here, but I was sitting up here chiseling away at this and I seen something shiny that fell out. I found a dang spark plug. So I guess that's good news. I guess that means at least one of the spark plugs in this thing's been changed at least once. So just thought that was kind of funny. There was a spark plug underneath the control arm up in this brace here. So I'm gonna get back to it. Okay, next thing we gotta do, down here on the engine crossmember, there's two U-bolts that hold the bar for that lower control arm on. They look like this, and when you got the front clip off and the motor out, it's real easy. You just stand over the top of it and buzz those four nuts off. But when it's still all together like this one is, it's really a pain. So there's nothing to it but to do it. I mean, you got to get under there and try to get a wrench or a ratchet or whatever you can in there to get those loose. So I got this cleaned up halfway decent. We're not doing a full-on restoration on it or making it, you know, a huge show truck or anything. We're just cleaning it up, make it look nice to go to local shows and stuff like that. So I got it good enough it could pass for SEMA. So we're just going to leave it like that. And I'm going to get on taking these bolts off. Just like that. Alright, I'm going to give you guys a coffee break real quick. I'm going to run some of this stuff outside. Clean up my mess here on the floor. And then I'll start getting the half-ton suspension pieces and we'll start getting it back together. Alright, so I got everything cleaned up over here. I'm going to take my U-bolts here over to the bench grinder over there and clean them off. And then we'll, when you go put this back on, there's these little holes. I don't know if, yeah, you can see them. There's these little holes and then you can see the grooves where it used to ride in the cup on the other truck. So you got to get that hole lined up in the front. The back one doesn't fit on anything, only the front one does, but that's your alignment for front to back. So we're going to set it up in there in the cradle, and we got to get that lined up, and that allows the crossbar here to stay stationary and let the control arm move on the bushings like it's supposed to. So you got to pay attention, make sure that gets lined up, because it won't seat in there right if it doesn't. So I'm going to go clean these up. We'll come back and throw this on. Alright, got the U-bolts all cleaned up here. I got this cleaned up good enough. So we're going to set the lower control arm up in there. We'll get our U-bolt started, and then we won't be able to get that alignment pin really held up. These are lock nuts, so they won't suck it up to where that alignment dowel lines up until you start getting them tight. So we're just going to have to get them in there where we can hang them, and then when I get under there and start tightening it up, I'll be able to line it up and tighten it down. Okay, so what I was trying to say when I was so rudely interrupted by the heater, I always put the front end first and line up the grooves and that centering dowel like I was showing you. And when you put it in, you want to tighten down the nuts on that U-bolt, but not crank down, like do your final tighten on them. You just want to get them up to where it's sitting where it's supposed to be, and they're snug, and then you go to the back and get your back tight, and then go back and tighten the front. That way it'll allow it to move in that U-bolt a little bit so everything gets lined up where it needs to be. So heater kicked on, I went ahead and did that. I got all that done. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to set our spring in the lower control arm. We're not really going to line anything up yet. We're just going to set it in there, and then we'll get our upper control arm. I took the half-ton truck apart the same way I took this truck apart. So our half-ton upper control arm and spindle assembly are still together. So we'll just take it up there, set it on the same way we took this one off, and we can bolt that on. And then then I'll tell you what we're going to do next. When you set your spring in, like it's coiled around, and the end of the coil sticks out right there. If you look at your lower control arm, there's actually a little spot ground or like pressed into the lower control arm that you make sure your spring sets against. If you don't have your spring clocked right, then it'll hold it funny or it can bind. So you just want to make sure you spin it around and get that little tab in that groove. Take that, hang it back up in there, and then we'll find our nuts here. Like I said before, I'm leaving all the shims and everything from the 3/4 ton suspension in there. It's not going to make the alignment right, but it'll be close. So good enough to get it to the alignment shop to get it aligned. those down. Now we need to get our jack back out, get it underneath this lower control arm. And then you want to make sure that your spring's going in. There's a cup in the top inside the engine cross member there that the spring's got to sit in, and you're never going to get it in right away usually, but you at least want to try to get it close. And then once you get it mounted up in there, you can pop it around a little bit with a pry bar and move it. At least that's how I do it. Alright, I think we actually got it in. So now we'll just gotta hold this out of the way for a little bit, and we'll start jacking this up. Get a lower ball joint lined up in the spindle. As soon as you get it to where you can get a nut on it, reach in there and get that nut on. Because that jack slips on you or something, you don't want that thing coming out at you. So we've got that going now. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up. Might have to take tension off of the jack so that it keeps the ball joint from spinning. We're not changing ball joints or tie rods or anything right now. Probably end up doing it a little later. So here's a little bit more of a close-up view. Your upper control arm, you got these two nuts right here, and they got these shims and spacers behind them, and that's how they get your caster camber adjustment for your alignment. So I left the 3/4 ton ones in there to hope it lines up halfway decent. It'll get us to the alignment shop. And then I don't know if you'll be able to see, let me grab a flashlight here. Down in here on the lower control arm, you can see that little nub where the end of the spring's sitting. And then you can see up here, we got all the marks lined up on those U-bolts where it was on the other truck. So we know we're pretty straight. And the alignment dowel's lined up, because otherwise that control arm wouldn't be able to suck all the way up to the saddle there. So that's good. And everything else pretty basic. We still got to replace the brake line. Looks like I did a pretty good job of cutting both of them in the same spot. And then the shock mount is just bolt with a nut at the bottom, and then it's got the stud up there on the frame rail. So I'm gonna get to checking out these bearings and repacking them, and then I'll get the other side done, and then we'll move on. All right, we got the front end conversion all wrapped up. Upper and lower control arms, 1/2 ton springs. We did go ahead, I couldn't handle that tie rod being loose, so we went ahead and replaced both tie rods on both sides, replaced the brake hoses on both sides, and then we went ahead and did new wheel bearings, new rotors, new calipers, new pads. So it's got all new brakes on the front, new shocks on the front. So, and then I got the line rerouted for the rear brakes, brought all the way back. It's hooked up. I bled all the brakes out. It's got good pressure. So I'm gonna go ahead and slap some wheels on it, set it on the ground. All right, we finally got all 4 corners of this thing sitting on the ground. My buddy that owns the truck picked out some wheels here. Got new wheels and tires for it. Sitting down, it's not lowered, so to say, but it's got a nice stance to it. It's substantially lower than it was as a 3/4 ton. So we'll probably end up lowering it a little bit more in the long run, but for right now, it'll be all right. So this truck sat in the field for about 10 years before my buddy bought it, and there's just a bunch of little stuff on it I'm doing for him. And I'm gonna put an electric fuel pump instead of the mechanical one. So recently got some new tools for the shop I kind of want to play with, and I don't want to wait to get a fuel pump block off plate, so I got some scrap metal laying around. Went ahead and traced this out on here, and then I took center punches, punched my 4 holes. I don't know how well you can see, they're there. But so I'm gonna go ahead and drill my holes first, and then I will cut this out and we'll sand it down and throw it in there. All right, I got my block off plate made. Took about 10 minutes, and it's exactly the same as the other one. All the holes line up, same shape, ground it all down. Just need to take and clean it up a little bit, and I'll chuck some paint on it, and then we can bolt it on the motor. I just want to make it myself. I got that belt sander new, and I just got that table for my portaband to have a bandsaw. And I kind of wanted to play with them, and the 10 minutes it took me to make it, I couldn't have drove to town and got one, came back that fast. So kind of some fun fabricating, and saved me some time. So I'll clean this up, get some paint on it, we'll bolt it on the motor, and then here in a minute I'll give you guys a walk around and show you everything I've been doing for the last couple days and get you caught up. Well, I've done a bunch of work to the truck since I haven't filmed. I haven't been doing much filming. I'm gonna go ahead and walk around and show you what I've done since I finished up on the front end part, and we'll go over that real quick, and then we'll tell you where we're going from there. So I got the fuel tank mounted. I had to go with a 16-gallon tank because the 20-gallon tank wasn't gonna fit. I probably could have made it fit, but it was easier to just put the 16 in there, and my buddy that owns the truck was okay with it. So the front brackets lined up on the tank, and then I just had to drill holes for the rear bracket here in the back and mount it up. We've been tinkering around with tuning it up and making it run better. Threw a new Edelbrock carburetor on there, cap, rotor, plugs, wires, fuel filter. I was telling you that we were putting an electric fuel pump on it I don't really trust the mechanical ones all that much. It was giving me a little bit of problems when I was trying to get it going, and I just said the heck with it, and we put a electric one on there. I don't know how well you can see it. Try to get some light in there. There's the block off plate that I made, all bolted up. Turned out pretty good. Finished the e-brake cables. Got the tank in. Got it running. That's what I've been messing with. So, aside from that, as soon as I get it cleaned up a little bit, I'm gonna pull it outside, and that way I can bring the bed in here. I have to cut one of the braces in the bed to clear the shackles. That's something you always gotta do when you use the drop shackles. So I'm gonna get the truck outside, bring the bed in here, do the customizing to the bed, and then I gotta replace the driver's door, and I'll go over that. The door I have to replace it with has a speaker hole cut out in it, and he's not gonna put speakers back in there, so we're gonna cut a panel out of another door and patch that door up and hang that. And then after that, put the bed on, hook all the lights and everything up, make sure everything's right, and then we'll be sending this thing out of here. So one more video after this one. We'll call the next one the payoff video, because we'll take it and drive it and see how it does. But I'm gonna end this one here. So y'all have a good one, and we'll see you next time.